Okay, here's my verbal write-up on the YK31 controller in a Huffy Torex. Doing this audio, y'all can reverse and play it. I guess first we'll start with the power. Power is obviously the red and black one. These controllers come with half-decent instructions on which wire is which, and they come with all these extra connectors and pins that you can wire them pretty easily. But the the power is pretty self-explanatory. Red and black goes to the battery. Matches the colors red and black. The next heavier duty wire is the motor control, or the motor output. Let me disconnect this. This, for anyone that's wondering, is a fan that I put on the controller to keep it from overheating. It seems to help a lot with. I wire it right to the battery capacity. It just comes on when he turns the switch on. It's just because it's 24 volts. Those are two 12 volts fans from a computer just wired in series. Alright, so they can take the 24 volts. Alright, so we got the motor. Excuse me, wiring. Motor. I pigtailed my motors together so that all four motors run off of the one plug. So far I haven't had any trouble. The front motors I think are pretty low wattage. They actually don't spin as fast as the rear motors, but they're made more for pulling them out of a ditch or something at low speed. And then like these front motors probably only go 5 miles an hour, but then they freewheel after that. They're not hard, geared, I guess, to the motor like the rear ones are, and that's what allows it to go backwards. So that the blue and the yellow goes to the motors, and then I found out that I had to reverse the polarity on the motors, otherwise forward would go reverse, reverse, forward. It wasn't a big deal. So we got them two. Like I said, the battery capacity is unused, but I used it for a fan. This red and green one is for the brake lights. You won't use that because you don't use the brake on this. I know it sounds funny, but you actually don't use the brake. All the brake does is disconnect all the power, which allows the motors to freewheel. Trust me, brakes don't work. I tried brake, my kid ran into my fence. You can kind of see it over here, it's all dented. Yeah, don't use the brakes the way you think you would. I'll get into that. This battery capacity, don't really know what that is. I assume it goes to a light, but it doesn't have a ground. I don't use it. This is the throttle. I found out that the stock throttle is compatible, but I had a problem and I cut the wires so they don't actually match up anymore, the colors. But it was, I think, I don't remember. I think the red stayed red. I'm sorry, I just don't remember, and it's in this ink shrink, so I can't get to it. But the colors were pretty close to the colors. When you cut them, when you see it, it's obvious. The black stays black. I think the blue might be green and the red's red, something like that. But you can use the stock throttle or the factory throttle with this controller, and it'll have variable throttle. So it means your kid pushes it lightly, the car goes half speed, or however it goes percentage. Full throttle, 100% throttle, that kind of thing. It's really neat. It's a neat feature. So that's the throttle. It won't be, yours aren't red. That was the throttle I had in here that went with this controller that you actually don't need. Again, these are just the motor. These are just the motor wires. What's next here? Next up is the reverse gear. That I ran to the blue and yellow wires from the forward reverse switch. You're actually only using, this switch isn't a double throw like you'd think. It's basically all you're doing is switching the controller to reverse. But once you find the wires that come from that switch, they're in a group of tiny wires that go to the factory controller. It's a blue and a yellow one, and you'll kind of be able to tell which ones they are. They'll be together. And there's one more with it. I think it's a brown wire with it. The brown you won't use. And that's reverse. And next we'll move on to the charger wire. Actually, it's not actually for charging. You'll still use the charging cable that plugs right into the battery. This I'm only using as a ground. The reason I'm using it as a ground, the white wire, careful, there's a couple white wires. If you wire it wrong, you will blow out your new controller and have to buy another one like I did twice. There was one white wire in the group of wires for the lights. I think that actually ends up going up to the black. If you're using a ohm meter, there's a gang of black wires all tied together in here for the switches. And all it does is light up these switches. So it's not even necessary. Let's see, we got that one. And actually, I lied. That white wire is necessary if you want to keep these lights working. You have to ground it, and then those lights will work again with those switches. The only thing I've noticed that doesn't work with this controller is the red power button no longer illuminates when the power's on. I'm not the smartest electrical guy. Someone else could probably figure it out. It wasn't that big of a deal for me to keep digging into it. The fan comes on when you push this power button. That's how he knows it's running. Alright, what do we got here? Blue, black, and green. Like I said, do not use the brake. I just remembered something. We'll get into that in a second here. The lock. This is just your power. It comes from the power button. On here, it's a red and green wire. They'll be close together, so you'll be able to tell them apart. And that is it, actually. That's all. Now the power wire, that was a tricky bit. That's how I make the brakes work. And when it comes out of here, when it comes out of the lock, it's actually, where'd lock go? When it comes out of lock, the red wire is hot. And it goes up to the switch panel, and that is actually what powers all the switches and the lights. And that's why the white wire comes back to the charger as a ground, so that all these lights work. Now what I did is, the brake pedal has a toggle switch in it, basically just like that one, but it's a momentary switch, so it doesn't stay on, it turns back off. What I actually had to do, and is the most complicated part of this whole process, is I took that switch out. I took the switch apart, which basically this comes out, this cover. There's like two little pins on the sides. And then I had to take one side of the normally closed, or normally open, and I had to move the pin from down there to up here on the back of the switch. And what that did was turn this switch, you could probably buy them like this, but turn this switch, one side of it anyway, to a normally closed. So when the brake is not being used, the circuit is closed. And then I wired the power switch through that switch so that when my son presses the brake, he's actually shutting off the controller. And what that does is it kills all the power to the back wheels, well, all the wheels, but the front ones, like I said, freewheel. What it does is it kills the power to the back wheels, and that is what actually brakes the car, like slows it down, and it works very well. But since I wired it to the negative side of the lock, it leaves the lights on. So it's not like the headlights and stuff don't turn off every time he hits the brakes. The headlights stay on. I don't know how, I got lucky, I think. But it turns the power off to the drive unit so that there's 0 volts going to the motors, and it acts like almost like a regenerative braking, but I don't think it regenerates. I don't think the controller is capable of it. But that is how I wired this controller, and you guys probably seen the other video. It works pretty well. Third one I've done, I shorted one out by accident. I actually melted one, well, not melted, but overheated it because I was using the brakes or the reverse as a brake, not throttling it, but it kind of worked the same way as killing the power. The brake switch would activate reverse, which would slow it down, but all that did was overheat it and it cooked a controller, so I don't recommend that. And like I said, I don't recommend using the brakes. What I recommend for brakes is to rewire or repin the brake pedal switch to be normally closed, so that when the brake's out, when he's not using the brake, it completes the circuit for the power, and then when he hits the brake, it opens the circuit to the lock wire, to the lock harness, and then kills the power to the motors. And that has been very reliable because obviously there's no power, it's not heating the controller, etc. It's like shutting it off so it slows them down. Alright, if you have any questions, write it down in the comments. These 2 wires are unused. It's something I was experimenting with. There were 2 leftover wires, a white one and a brown one, I think. Yeah, white and a brown. I'm not really sure what they were for. I think they probably have something to do with why my power light doesn't light up anymore. If I grounded one of them, the power light would probably light up. But anyway, let me know if it works. If you guys feel like blowing up a resistor, playing with it, blowing up a controller. Thanks for watching. See ya.